I already know, Utad said, and put his hand to his temple. If they are referring to her as queen, was it one of those slippery bastards who fired the arrow? Finan guessed that the question was rhetorical, and so said nothing. So what was she doing with the king of the Simbric then? Utad continued. Finan glanced back. It did indeed look as if Osrith had come from the tent with the red dragon banner above it. I couldn't say, Finan told him. It depends on what business she has with that priest there, he added. He nodded towards Bishop Oswald, who also greeted Osrith with delight, and drew her to him. I will if you will, Utad told his friend. What? Finan asked. Make peace with my eldest son if you make peace with yours. Finan turned his head and stopped walking. I am not at war with mine, Finan told him. Like hell you are not. He loathed being at Bibbenberg at the end. I was glad to see the back of him. Little shit. Back in Albo is the best place for him. Utad saw his friend's expression at his words but did nothing to lessen their impact. Instead, he added, what arrangement was made that allowed Constantine to have the guts to send Domnall to Gerfrith and Neofoik over with the Cymric and her nephew? Osrith was also discussing Utad's relationship with his eldest son. He is here, Osrith told Oswald. You can make it up with your father. Here. It is a good place with oaths having been said already, it clears the way. Believe me, aunt, I have tried, Oswald told her. I went over to speak to him, but he refused to even look at me. Do you think that it might have been my sister who pulled the bow? Utad asked Finan, as they neared the West Saxons. Probably, I would have in her position too, Finan told him. Except, of course, we both know it was a Norseman. Either Guthfrith or Anlaf. My money's on Guthfrith, Utad told him. 2 pennies, Finan proposed and stuck out a hand. Done, he told him, as Utad shook it. Over from the Cymric, however, Osrith was striding towards her brother, her nephew left behind her. Brother, she nodded, and looked at her husband. He nodded, as if they were acquaintances. He is married to Utad then, in his way. Osrith thought. Prefers to offend me than my brother. Might have thought you'd be here, Utad told her, and turned to his friend. I said to you, Finan, did I not, that I hope no bastard is trying to take Bibbenberg. But she is here, as is your son, the Christian. Both your sons are Christian, as are most of your guard, Osrith pointed out, as your woman, Benedetta. At this, Utad bridled, and he turned his eye on her ferociously. Leave her out of it, he snapped. But Osrith had found a thread and was beginning to pull. Does she know how badly you treated Edith in the end? Oh no, Osrith, murmured Finan, looking at her, trying to encourage her to stop. You? Utad spat back. You have the gall to say that to me? After what, brother? Osrith pressed, hand immediately on Ba, aware that people were gathering round them, watching, listening. After all you've done? Don't say it was all for Bibbenberg. But before she could withdraw her sword, Utad was up close and in her face, his own twisting in a vicious snarl. You think the Gales are your friends? Domnall went to Guthfrith, and Ethelistan extracted payment for this failed alliance. Osrith replied. What is your point? That you should be with your husband. You should leave Beric to be with your family. They are my family. Osrith shot back, continuing in Danish. And I tried, Utad, I really did. You even sent away your own nephew, when I was trying to be family to you. Well, Utad told her, belligerently, Domnall promises Bibbenberg on behalf of Constantine, through you. Osrith stood back, feeling her mouth fall open. She wanted to say it was a mistake, but Constantine would not make mistakes. He would surely know she would never agree to that. I manage the land that was once our ancestors, Osrith told him with as much dignity as she could. As do you. He could easily claim that I am doing the same on your behalf. Finan, she nodded, and made to step past her brother. I claim him, Utad told her, viciously, taking her arm. Osrith turned, staring at Utad as he clung painfully to her arm. Who? Osrith asked. Your son. He told her. You are my sister. My warrior has claimed him as his son. As Lord of Bibbenberg, he is tied to me until he is 21. If Osrith had been shocked at Utad's claim of being used by Constantine, it was nothing to what she was hearing now. No. she exclaimed. "He has been with you enough." But Uhtred grinned, with no humor in it. "What right do you have? What right did you have to steal away Baku and Thyra's daughter?" Uhtred challenged her. "What right did you have to make her Gaelish, to let her wed a Norseman?" "The same right you gave yourself over others," Osrith retorted, a pang of guilt in her mind. She had had none. But the girl would have died had she not fed her at her own breast, had she not taken her with her. "When you played the part of fate, you were not there," she added. "You were at the church at Alfred's funeral when fire was set. I got her out. She was alive when I rescued her, alive enough to deliver her daughter." Uhtred was not expecting that. His face had withdrawn in shock, and paled. But he rallied quickly and reminded her, "Your son." "Never," Osrith declared, though she knew it was fruitless. Uhtred had the right, because if she denied him, she told the world that Finan was not young Finan's father. To that effect, Uhtred leveled his feet and took a step back, sheathing his sword and folding his arms. "So, you deny my warrior is the father of your son?" Too many people, Osrith thought. There were too many people listening into the conversation. And she yielded. Osrith looked at Finan, and agreed. "There," said Uhtred, lightly to his friend, as if he had been doing Finan a favor all this time. "You have your son back with you now." Osrith turned, but Uhtred grabbed his arm. "Until he is 21, Osrith told him, and she wrestled her arm from Uhtred's grasp. She turned to leave, nodding to her husband, but the snort of derision had come from Uhtred's direction. Osrith turned back, landing the mightiest kick she could into Uhtred's testicles. He staggered back at the pain, unable to breathe, let alone say anything. "You'll be going back to Berwick?" Finan asked, when he caught up with her, just before the bridge. "Osrith?" She turned back to her husband, and saw on his face sadness instead of anger, regret instead of annoyance. "Why, after everything?" he asked. "Can ye two not have a civil conversation? I thought, when I married ye might have been able to put this behind you, and at least become civil." "I?" Osrith asked. "I? Is it me who is taking his son away? Is it me who chooses to behave as he does? When he has a choice, why does he choose the one which will make it worse for the people he calls family?" She exhaled, and stopped her self-defense. "Take young Finan," she told him. "Take your son, Finan M8²R, for I could not have asked for a better child, the best part of me, the best of you." She nodded to Uhtred, who had now managed to get back on his feet. "But Berwick, I will never leave my land. I cannot choose to be on the side of Albo any more than I can choose to be on the side of Aethelstan. I choose nothing, and I defend my lands accordingly." But they both knew that wasn't true. They both knew which side Osrith would fight on, in the end, if it did come to war. And not only would she be facing her husband, but her brother and son as well. It was an impossible choice. No, she was going home to Berwick. It was both Northumbria and Pitland, it was England and it was Ilba, which meant it was neither. It might well come off for the good if she continued to behave as if it were a neutral piece of land. "Tell young Finan I love him, from the moment I knew he was coming, to now, and for all time." And Finan took the few steps that got her to himself, and enclosed her in his arms, kissing her. "If there is a battle I will take no part in it," Osrith told him, when he placed a hand on her back and drew her to his shoulder. "I am not asking I am telling," she said, fiercely, "because whatever the outcome, people I love are going to die." "Then come back with us," Finan told her. But Osrith shook her head. "No, I am going back. We'll see you at home, Finan Moore," she told him, and she kissed him back and kept kissing him until Finan chanced upon an empty tent and backed Osrith into it, unclothed in one another in practiced seconds before Finan maneuvered her down onto a warrior's bedding, hands on her body, one hand already down her leg until it found her cuntlips and pried them open with his fingers. Finan turned her on by pressing and twisting his fingers around her clit, his wrist getting the full force of her wetness. It wasn't long before he was eating her out, and not long after that she had brought his cock to his mouth and they were blowing one another. Finan came first and Osrith tasted the first salty tang and then the mild sweetness of his cum. But Finan did not stop for Osrith, and she felt the release within a few seconds, her nipples stiff, for Finan had her breasts in his hands and was twisting and compressing them for her, and when he got the taste of her wetness, drew her to her back and knelt astride Osrith, plunging deep inside her before even her orgasms had waned, her erect clitoris rubbing roughly against the base of his cock. More orgasms, more thrusting, more nipple play, from them both, until they had worked out their grievances on one another and they were exhausted. "It's good to know I am humping a queen," Finan told her, when they lay next to one another. No more orgasms physically possible, Osrith reckoned. "I wish they would stop doing that," Osrith told him. But yes, Queen Gwythelth came to Ethelastan's call and bowed to him, on behalf of the Hen-O-led Cymric, as did Prince Sindlan. "But not you?" Finan asked. "No," she told him, moving herself closer to his naked body. "The Lady of Berwick stands neutral, for it is not her land to promise to Ethelastan, it is my people's land. Ethelastan will have to come to Berwick himself to ask them." They did not pause long before they dressed and then parted, leaving their juices over this poor warrior's belongings, Finan heading one way, and Osrith the other. He was going to find young Finan and tell him what they had agreed. Osrith had, for her part, promised she would leave in the morning and go directly home. Osrith crossed the bridge, first, and overheard a conversation which, as it turned out, made her thank God that she had met Eric Thurgilson, and he had taught her Norse. 88,888,888 Matter. It took a good few minutes of brilliant morning sunshine to get through to Osrith's brain that it was, indeed, the next day, and that she needed to get up. Another few seconds told her that she was hungry, and yet a few more told her that her son was standing in front of her. He seemed to be angry. "Very angry." "Finan big?" she asked, sitting up and rubbing her eyes. But there was no easy wake-up on the cards as her son stood over her, pushing aside the leather covering which she had hung over the tree branch. "Matter," he protested. "Why did you do it?" Osrith knew what, of course, and she stood up, stamping her legs for a moment to wake herself up some more. "Because I had no choice," Osrith told her. "The law says that a lord has the rule over his dependents. As you are my son, and your father is a warrior in his service, he has rule over you until you are 21. She saw Finan's eyes widen, a hand go to his mouth. 5 years?" he asked, gasping the words. 4 years and 4 months, Osrith told him. "He has the responsibility to care for you, nurture you, feed you," she added. They both knew she was on a losing path, argument-wise, but Osrith had very little to say in her own defense. "You get on with it, Jewel, do you not? And Berg?" young Newted. But, young Finan was not falling for that. It was a paltry excuse, and it was excusing Uted's blatant misuse of his power over them. And he was not finished yet. "Matter," young Finan exclaimed. "Why do you go to him?" "And Uted?" "He is your father," Osrith said, determinedly. "Uted is your uncle. After what they did." "What my uncle did?" "The man you name as my father?" He shook his head. Osrith had never kept anything from young Finan, but clearly he had found out. "Your cousin Oswald?" Osrith guessed. But young Finan did not answer. Instead he said, "I was sickened when I heard it, sickened with what he did to you. I will kill him for what he got Ethelwold to do." Osrith looked away. Not out of shame, but because she was sorry that she hadn't been the one to tell him. "Finan is your father, Finan Beeg," she told her son. "It would make life so much easier if he was not. However much you call Constantine at her, no matter how much you wish it, it is not so. So, it is my dearest wish that you try with Finan, that if I can put it aside, so can you." "But, who told you?" Osrith repeated, her last 2 words almost shouted at her son. Young Finan hesitated. "Young Uted," young Finan told her. "I could stay not a moment longer, and so I conspired with Bishop Oswald to get as far away from Bibbenberg as I could." So that was it. He was Ulba. He would be fighting against his father in any war to come, and from what Osrith could see, it would not be long, from the monstrously egotistical way Ethelastan had acted when he took the oaths from those he had vanquished. But, of course, he would not. Young Finan would train under Uhtred and, as such, be part of a group of warriors who looked after one another no matter what. And Osrith's heart lightened. One day, Osrith said, taking young Finan's shoulders, "There will be a war, between the Cymric and Gaels, and the English and Saxons. Learning to fight with the biggest turd in this land will make you as close to unbeatable as I could hope for." It was then that young Finan's face changed, and she took a step from his mother. Then, he turned, and took her hand, kissing it. "You are going?" Osrith asked, his face lighter now. "I will go, if it please you, mother," young Finan told her, and Osrith nodded. The last image she remembered of her son, that she had on horseback, was riding away to the east, as he strode across the meadow to the Wolf's Head banner.